What's up everybody? Welcome back to the Art of Crypto. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the best potential swing trade entry that you can be getting in for Bitcoin at the moment. Now, this is going to remain relevant over the course of the next few months. Throughout this video, I will also share with you my personal swing trade entry and how I was able to catch the exact bottom right here for Bitcoin at 25,600 and to about 25k. So if that's something you want to figure out, make sure you stick around to the end of this video. So firstly, we're going to dive into the swing trade that I have personally taken. And in this case, it is going to be between 29k and 28,700k with a stop at 28k. And my target is going to be at 35,000 as the first target. So let's dive into that. Why am I taking a trade there? And why is my target at 35k? And the first thing that you need to understand, which is going to be pretty much the premise of this entire video actually, is the fact that Bitcoin CME futures gaps are immensely useful as a trading tool. Now, what do I mean by that? If you take a look at the trades section, you can see that I bought BTC at 25,600, right? That was back in mid-May. So that was a little bit over a month ago, or almost a month ago at the time that I'm filming this video. And it's really powerful because the way I was able to determine that this would be the bottom is if I just draw your attention to here, you can see that there is a Bitcoin CME futures gap whereby there is zero price action happening at this precise block until, present history. And that's how I sort of knew that that was going to be the bottom, right? Because my entry was right there. So CME futures gaps essentially occurs during the weekends, right? Or during any kind of public holiday. The Bitcoin CME futures are going to be closed. They're not working essentially, they're taking a break. And if price were to do some kind of really aggressive movement while the Bitcoin CME futures are closed, then that's where you get this gap, right? Because I want you to notice how there is no timer. If you zoom in here, there is no timer under the price action. I want you to observe the fact that the Bitcoin CME futures at the moment is sitting at about 29,570. Meanwhile, the actual Bitcoin price at the moment is sitting at 29,700. So isn't that odd? That's exactly what's happening. So CME futures are closed at the moment. So if price, let's say, were to pump to 35k overnight right at this instant, then there is going to be a very, very big gap on the CME futures. And that gap, right, is basically an imbalance, and imbalances always get filled sooner or later. So that is exactly what you got during this entry here. And just to give you another, piece of evidence that this is really, really powerful, if you guys were watching me back in the beginning of this year, you would have known that for months, essentially for weeks and months, I was talking about the fact that Bitcoin was going to find a bottom between this block right here, right? I'm going to draw that box there and look at where the Bitcoin bottom came, right there in the CME futures gap. So why do I talk about this, right? I'm not just trying to, show off or whatever. The trade that I'm looking at in particular at this very moment happens to be predicated on the Bitcoin CME futures gap, right? Because take a look. There is a gap at 29,125 to about 29k. So that is going to be the entry that I'm going to be recommending to you guys. Although it is not exactly the entry that I'm taking personally, but this would be very, very good because not only was this a snipe essentially, I was trying to catch the bottom, but now that price has broken structure, I want you to take a look here on the daily chart. Not only has this right here been the first higher high on the daily chart since basically the 4th of May, right? Since this point onwards, you have been forming consistently lower highs and lower lows until this point right here where you broke structure on the daily chart. This means that on a higher time frame, the direction, market structure, as well as momentum is starting to shift towards the upside. The first higher high is always, the first step to reversing of, direction. And the second one is going to be a higher low, which is going to be formed somewhere around here. And then voila, this video is going to make a lot of people a lot of money. If you see the reasoning behind why I recommend that you guys enter into the Bitcoin CME futures gap, I want you to drop a like on this video and I want you to comment the words CME below to show that you've watched until this point so far. So on a macro time frame, you already have signs that direction is about to reverse, right? So let's go back into the 4-hourly and let's take a look at the CME futures gap and exactly the stop that I would recommend. So in this instance, I would recommend that you place a stop beneath this swing low or beneath that swing low right there. Honestly, I don't know which one's going to be better. If you want to reduce your risk to reward ratio, then that's going to be the ideal target. And so the price target, right? The target that we're going to be shooting for is, as you guessed it, the CME futures gap, which is about 21% from this point onwards. Is that going to get hit? Yes, absolutely. It's going to get hit. You have so many indicators that the market is just really fearful at the moment. You look at the Dow, right? It's on the longest weekly losing streak. You look at Bitcoin, it's probably on a very long weekly losing streak as well, in the sense that you are getting many, many down close candles in a row, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So that's 9 weeks of consecutive just downwards price movement. And this is on a weekly chart, mind you. And I'm not sure if this is the longest streak that we've had on Bitcoin, but I do know that interest in crypto is at an all-time low at the moment. And people are just scared, they've lost all their money. And generally, this is like the best buying opportunity to create life-changing generational wealth tends to be during times like these. So I really do hope that this entry is going to be able to make a lot of you really good money. And if you ever want to get access to more trades like this, then the private Discord group is going to be the place to be. And that is going to be in the description box below. So you take a look at Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index, you are at extreme fear at the moment. And 10 is historically low values, right? So we have two confluence factors right there that things are about to reverse for Bitcoin. Besides that, I actually just saw a really interesting piece of data today, which is that the average market returns during a presidential term, right? It tends to underperform in the lead up to the midterms and then outperform after the election. So if you just take a look at the chart right here, we are at Q2 at the moment, heading into Q3, right? So this is another piece of confluence factor that I think is going to play out really well for Bitcoin, by the way. And then we take a look at DXY. So if you remember back then, I predicted that DXY at the minimum, right, at the minimum was going to hit 97.7 points. But of course, it did hit all the way up to 105 points. So either way, now that the target has been hit, we have to figure out what's next. In fact, we don't really even have to figure out what's next, because if we go onto the daily chart, you can see that for the first time, basically since I'd say the beginning of January, the beginning of 2022, right? Notice how we have consistently just formed higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows, right? And at the moment, guess what just happened, right? You just had your first lower low. And at the moment, you just had your first lower high on the daily chart. So this is a macro time frame, by the way. And usually, just like how on Bitcoin, we are starting to reverse momentum towards the upside, on the DXY, you are starting to reverse momentum towards the downside. Now, why is this important? Why do I bring up DXY? Because the DXY, right, essentially is like the counter to equity markets, in the sense that when the DXY is pumping, right, equity markets such as Bitcoin, such as the stock market, like the S&P 500, such as the NASDAQ and all the other good stuff, when the DXY is going up, those tend to be going down. At the moment, when DXY is going down, you get the reverse, the inverse of that for assets like Bitcoin. Now, I want you to guess the exact point, right, that the 2020 to 2021 crypto bull market began. I'm sure it can be easily spotted right there, right, during this entire rundown right here on the DXY, which started, on the 20th of March, 2020, until, give or take, June of 2021. Now, I'm just going to go back onto Bitcoin and guess where everything began, right? So from March of 2020, you had the massive run up until June 2021. So where is June 2021? Right there. So the peak occurred right as the DXY found its bottom. And that's why I bring that up. It's a really just powerful confluence factor. And it's a tool that can generally be used to predict the macro just direction for asset classes, especially for Bitcoin, because it is such a high risk asset. And if you're wondering why that is the case, you just have to imagine, like, the DXY is an index of the US dollar, right? If the DXY is going up, that means that the power of the USD is going up. Now, what is Bitcoin and all these other assets like the S&P 500, etc. are pegged to? That's right, the USD. Bitcoin USD, right? If USD goes up, it'd be easy to imagine that Bitcoin would go down, right? Simple as that. Just simple valuations, simple math. So when the DXY, right now, it's showing signs that it's going down, voila. So going back to that trade in the beginning, I mentioned that the maximum account risk that I would be comfortable taking is 5%. Now, do I recommend the same for this trade in particular? Honestly, I don't recommend you guys play with real money at all. I'm just sharing my ideas. And if you guys do decide to play with real money, know that this is just an opinion and not like, just financial advice. So if you do take this trade, please make sure that if you do lose this trade, you do not lose, just be responsible with your money, right? This is not like 100%. While most of the data that I shared points to the fact that Bitcoin is going to be pumping, trading is still gambling. And with trading, there is risk. So now let's talk about the second target of why I would want to take profit at 48K. So I want you to pay attention to the fact that from this dump right here, in fact, not even that dump, from the top, right, from the exact top, right, if we just draw a fib from 69K down to 26.6, or, if you were looking at the USDC chart, then that's going to be at about 25 to 24. You can see that the midpoint, right, the exact midpoint from the top to the bottom is at 48K, right? Assuming that this is the bottom, which I do assume. And then you might be asking, how can you just assume that that's going to be the bottom? Well, one, experience, and two, nobody knows anything for certain when it comes to trading. You're simply taking the higher probability trade over the lower probability trade over time, and that's how you become successful as a trader, right? So 48K right there, and that's the second target. And honestly, as long as you hit 48K, heck, even if you were to hit 35K, and I'm just going to show you, right? This Bitcoin CME futures gap is really, really powerful stuff because you can see it on the chart as well. Even when you're not on the Bitcoin CME futures, right? Take a look here. You have one gap there, you have one gap there, and then you have another gap right there on the daily chart, right? And how do I know that it is a gap? I want you to pay attention to the price action. Notice how there is zero price action and there is zero price action right there. These are what you call fair value gaps, right? Imbalances. And that is essentially what the CME futures gap is, right? It's a fair value gap, and gaps tend to be filled. So take a look here, right? The top of this is at about 34,800. Now, there is going to be some slight variation when compared to the CME futures gap because this is a different exchange. This is a different, just chart altogether, but you get the idea. Right? And going back to what I was talking about before, if you were to just hit like 48K, right? Or even just 35K, right? So that is about, let's see here, 29K, right? Let's go down to 29K. My stop loss, at least the stop loss that I recommended, would be set there and your target right there. So that's about 4 to 5, maybe 6 risk to reward ratio. And assuming you're risking about 3 to 5% of your account, that's about 15 to 25 R, which is 15% to 25% of your account growth once you hit profit target number 1. And if you were to hit profit target number 2, that number increases exponentially, right? If you were taking, that's 15R by the way, 15R. If you were taking 5% account risk, that would be 75% account gain using essentially a 64% gain in Bitcoin, which is entirely possible, right? 35K for certain, right? Absolutely certain that is going to get hit. 48K is going to take a little bit of time. But assuming you just place a stop loss to 3% in this instance, notice how your risk to reward jumps to 20, right? So play around with the stop loss, use one that you're comfortable with, use risk that is within your risk appetite. Now, the final question is going to be, can you apply this to altcoins? Absolutely, because of the fact that altcoins tend to follow the ebb and flow of Bitcoin, especially at the moment when Bitcoin dominance is so high, right? So high. Look at that. That is not a beautiful sight to look at if you're interested in altcoins. And here's the thing that you need to understand about, Bitcoin and altcoins, right? Altcoins cannot really take off until dominance is high enough and Bitcoin has made the leading move. At the moment, I'm banking on the fact that Bitcoin's going to be making the leading move within this month, essentially. And if you follow that theory exactly, then yes, if Bitcoin pumps, you can absolutely apply this to altcoins. In fact, if Bitcoin pumps, right, it's just going to be the beginning of altcoin season. Because in order for altcoins to perform exceptionally well, Bitcoin dominance needs to be high enough so that altcoins have a lot of room to dump the Bitcoin dominance, right? As Bitcoin dominance goes down, altcoin dominance goes up, right? That means the altcoin market cap needs to overtake Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin dominance is not high enough, then there's not much room for altcoins to move. And it just so happens that there is a key level of resistance for Bitcoin dominance that we are very near to at the moment. So yeah, everything just adds up to the fact that crypto as a whole is about to start reversing. And if you want to be able to take advantage of this new wave that's about to come, and even if it might not last long, there is still a lot of money to be made. If you want to take advantage of that, the private group is going to be the place to be. We are building a really solid culture here, and we are going to be making a lot of money over the upcoming months. So if that's something you're interested in, check out the private group. Link will be in the description box below. But otherwise, if you are interested in these kinds of in-depth analysis videos, then the series that I'm going to point you towards next is going to be the 10K to 100K challenge, where I literally break down every single trade, every single major trade that I'm taking in the journey of growing an account from 10K to 100K. If that sounds like fun to you, click that.